on sort of this project for about 15 years doing research on the Dulles area. I grew up in nearish to Herndon, pretty close, and this always kind of compelled me because you have this large swath of land, and to the layperson you can't really tell about anything that came before that, and that to me, and it was undocumented at the time. That to me was kind of intriguing. So all of my work is pretty much culminated into this online web app. It's called Heritage Dulles. You can log in, preferably on the computer, but it does work on the phone as well. It works on iPads as well. And I consider it more of a tool or maybe an online museum that you can use to further research as well. And I guess I'll get down into it. So it is an interactive web mapping application. So anyone here who likes maps, I certainly do. This is the basis for just about everything. And incorporates mixed media into really highly precise roadmaps that depict the 1820s, the 1870s, 1957, and today. This is all a work in progress. It does continue. The work continues, and I continue to add layers. There will most likely be a 1990 layer. The 1820 layer that you will see is very much under construction and incomplete. But the 1870s and the 1957 maps that you will see are what I would say pretty significantly complete. And I think I've worked pretty tirelessly to make it as precise as can be. My goal is I want this to be the Google Maps of back then, right? I don't want anything to be vague. I don't want anything to be wishy-washy. I want to be as precise and accurate as possible. I incorporate several instruments. I'm going to call them instruments. These are the mixed media. So we got photographs, we got press clippings, we've got deed plats, property overlays, basically deed plats, and more. And it's built on a modern software stack akin to what if you load up Bing or Apple or Google Maps or whatever you might use, Garmin, whatever. They're pretty similar in the technologies that are used.
Gibran, 1 second.
Yeah.
It seems like we're having some people are having issues with audio. It seems like my colleague can hear, but others can't. So I'm just going to move the microphone out of your way behind you. Let's see if I can put it. Here, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Can you guys hear me now? All right.
Yes.
Yes, perfect, great. So I'm going to go through some of the instruments for, because if you're not in this field, these might be new to you. They were certainly new to me only a few years ago. So the first thing we're going to talk about is deeds. Deeds are a legal document that transfers ownership of property from or asset from one person to another. So there's a grantor and the grantee, the person who gives the deed, the person who receives it, and a payment is typically made. Both counties in the last decade or so have scanned every deed that has basically changed hands in Loudoun County and in Fairfax County. So there are deed book indices for both Fairfax and Loudoun. It is all digitized, and we can use modern tools to search and basically make quick work of finding, based on name or the deed book and page, where these things are and who is involved. The whole state has basically scanned all the actual deeds themselves. And as you go further and further back, you get to lots of quill, pen, ink work. And sometimes there are plats that are additionally added to these deeds, which is super helpful. Here's an example, and here's an example of that penmanship that's sometimes involved. So one of the challenges that is very, very rapidly advancing with modern tech, especially with machine learning, is OCR, which is to say, I want the computer to be able to read all that hand script and turn it into text that I can then search through. As you can imagine, that makes things a lot easier. Yes.
Did all of Fairfax Deeds books survive the Civil War?
That I couldn't tell you. I don't have a good answer. That's a great question. Chancery cases are another instrument that I use pretty heavily. So cases in chancery involve estate and business disputes, typically, and debts. Typically, if someone passes away, this is where there would be a legal case involving, okay, so what gets distributed to whom? Typically heirs or close family and friends. The Library of Virginia has gone to great lengths in the last decade to digitize these chancery indices. This is still a work in progress, but I think up until the turn of the century, we have most of them online. And luckily, just like I was talking about deed plats being useful, sometimes there's chancery plats. This is a good example. You can even skip to it on their little website, which I actually have links to from my tool. So here you can see this little portion of Chantilly basically drawn out for you by someone in 1891, it seems like. Insurance policies are also super helpful. There were a lot of great fires during the industrialization wave after the Civil War and through the turn of the century. Insurance coverage became less of a niche thing as fire became more of a threat. So just like today, you have insurance policies that were taken out on properties and the assets on those properties. And sometimes they'll even tell you very specific details about structures. You can imagine how useful this might be. So I think this particular document is from the 1890s or so.
How far back do those go? Fire insurance?
So this particular example is from the Loudon Mutual Insurance Company. I think they were based in Waterford, and I think they operated their heyday as probably the turn of the century, so let's say 1880s to 1920s. There was an earlier mutual assurance company, same concept. I think that dated back to the 18 teens, it's a slightly more archaic. So it's based on what companies' records exist. So these are currently being digitized at the moment.
Okay. In South Carolina, I think they have, there was companies there, as far back as the 1700s.
Nice, yeah.
So I didn't know if that existed in Virginia or not.
I mean, you get close, the 18 aughts, 18 teens. Okay. I'm not so sure we're getting that far back, at least not here. Perhaps in Old Town Alexandria, I would imagine there's something. Okay. But this is all a work in progress. It's pretty recently scanned, and all of this is happening at a pretty rapid pace. It's kind of exciting because someone from back then, with their own eyes, wrote this. Yeah, it's a whole lot different from so much speculation that occurs when you're looking back on it retroactively. So these were heavily involved as well. Land tax records, probably one of the most important ones. So these, just like today. Each county, usually based on, they were separated into districts, and there would be someone in charge of each district with a ledger of property owners, how much they were worth, how large were these properties. And the key thing here is you will find the assessed value based on structures built. This is really critical because it can tell you and give you an idea of when a property was wooded and just fields, and someone had built an improvement on it. And that can sort of pinpoint a sort of date from a primary source. Even that's a little bit fuzzy because sometimes there was lags in what was recorded in these tax documents. So you would also have a description, which is super useful. It'll say near Broad Run, near Goose Creek, right? It would tell you, oh, roughly where is this? Super helpful today because those streams and tributaries are pretty much the same, have the same names today. And once again, it is an OCR challenge. Here you see this beautiful penmanship from probably, 1866. Pretty much looks like this, probably less legible the century before, but we're rapidly turning these digital with the help of computing and just good old-fashioned time and effort.
Yeah.
Historical aerial photography. This is something that I think helped bring me into this chase because this started becoming digitized and publicized, I would say the early 2010s. And in the last 10 years, both Loudoun, Fairfax, and on a state and federal level, there's been a lot of digitization of old photography. So most of this starts at around 1937. This is when the, I want to say, USDA, the Farm Services agencies specifically, first did their aerial photography to do analysis. How is this land used? And I think at the time, what kind of crops were used, vegetation was of note for them. So all of this stuff has been orthorectified, which is to say, these were taken with film cameras looking down on a biplane. But we can take that and using a lot of math and using a lot of technology, squeeze and stretch things to exactly where they should be so they line up to a modern satellite-based pinpoint precision map that you can explore for free today. Both of these counties offer that, as well as Old Town Alexandria, Arlington, DC, and the like. So georeferencing is never perfect. Today, satellites can take a look at all parts of the world with insane precision, but back then, each of these cameras had a slightly different angle. You know how it goes when you're taking cameras. There's also all sorts of optical artifacting and things that occur, distortion. So nothing's perfect, but we can get quite close. Newspapers. This is the last organic instrument I'm going to talk about. So particularly with the Library of Virginia in conjunction with the Virginia Chronicle, these are two organizations at the state level that have done tremendous work to scan and digitize newspapers that previously were only on microfilm in the last few decades. And you now have this is free for anyone to use. You can search through newspapers back to the mid to late 1700s, and OCR has been run on all of these things. I was able to type in Arcola as a search query like I would on Google. It shows up and even gives me a snippet of each newspaper where Arcola was mentioned. This is pretty unprecedented, not even a tech that would have been widely available 10 years ago. Super helpful for this project. Previous mapping efforts. So this is where I'm going to talk about the people who helped make this happen over the last few decades. This is just one example. On the Fairfax side, Beth Mitchell and Edith Moore Sprout, these were cartographers and historians who worked with the county, I want to say in the 90s and 80s, to help map these deeds. So one example, this is the land ownership in Fairfax County in 1860, and painstakingly, these women went through and mapped these out over what was then a modern overlay of properties to great accuracy and great precision. There's a very similar project that a gentleman, Win Saffer, helped do on the Loudoun side. I've met him. They put just as much painstaking work into that. And there's currently improvements and I guess greater efforts to digitize this data as we speak. So these were scanned, but clearly done with crayon, and they were scanned, so they're in a digital space, but they're not necessarily digital. These are just pictures. So this is going to lead to something that I will show you. So I guess this is the historical part of this. So I'm going to go into a quick chronology. Most of you guys probably have heard a lot of this stuff before, but just to give a proper layout, what I'm gonna do is go through different eras in history, and it's based on cartography because I care about maps and I want to see how the maps changed. I want to see what was added during different periods of history, different technologies that emerged. And I'm going to switch back and forth into my app to kind of show you the physical artifact that you would see. So I think this is a good place to start. This is a really early map from the 1730s of the region. At this time, Loudoun County, I think, is encompassing most of what is Fairfax County. And all of the Dulles area would be located roughly over here between Broad and Difficult Run. So there was this notion of the Northern Neck Proprietary. So there was a Lord Fairfax of Cameron, Thomas VI. This is who the county is named after, who was the agent for, I guess, the King of England at the time, who had what they considered jurisdiction over this whole region. At the time, it was pretty sparsely populated, but with the Sioux and the Algonquin and Piscataway indigenous tribes. So the notion of them being in just one county or the other is kind of made up, right? These are what you call Columbian borders. So these populations existed, and unfortunately, due to biohazards or otherwise, there was a whole lot of mass death where we had immune systems from Europe and Asia that just were used to microbial life that the indigenous had not been used to. That and purposeful driving out of old populations sort of resulted in what we see today. In 1729, there was a project called the Frying Pan Copper Mine. Colonel Robert Carter won. This guy was the acting governor of Virginia, Speaker of the House of Burgesses, which is one of the early legislatures for the state. And he was one of those agents for this Northern Neck Proprietary. This guy was an aristocrat. He was born at Corrodeman, which is a 17th century plantation in Lancaster County, quite far away from here. Unfortunately, does not stand today. He owned, among many tracts, a 762-acre tract in northwest Fairfax County, quite close to airport borders, that happened to yield copper ore. He sent a sample to London for testing and confirmation. This must have taken weeks. But he had collaborated with, I guess, academics who tested these samples. And indeed, it turned out to be copper after much speculation. So in 1729, the Frying Pan Copper Mining Company was established. They used mining laborers from England as well as slaves to dig and haul this ore down what was called the wagon road to Occoquan to be loaded onto their ships. The work conditions were very poor. His laborers protested. There's tons of documents and letters and memoirs of strikes occurring. The luck ran out in 1732 when the mine was abandoned. It's not particularly well documented. This is an example of what mining would have probably looked like at the time. And you might question where, so what does that have to do with this? Where is this? So the wagon road is what we now know as the Ox Road. There's not really one singular Ox Road today. This was a road that started at the Occoquan, which is right here, pretty close to this little peninsula on the Potomac. And this wagon road was supposedly built on an indigenous path that had existed before. Today, this is part of Route 123, Route 608, and then what you might know as Old Ox Road near Sterling and Ashburn, Route 606. And all of these, broadly speaking, if you zoom out, you can actually still make out that original path today, although things have deviated. So there's plats from that Northern Neck land grant from 1729. They're quite useful. This star depicts where that mine was, and this dashed blue line depicts where that wagon road was. So I think the bottom shows where it meets the Occoquan River, where these barges would have come and they would put ore onto it. And the top is closer to the Herndon area, where near Dulles Airport, where that mine would have been. So I'm going to switch over to my map. So this is Heritage Dulles, just to give you an overview. I can read some articles. I can read about the communities. I can also click the communities on this map. It is, if you've ever used a mapping software on your phone or on the internet, they look pretty similar to this. I've got all these little landmarks that you can click on and read a blurb about. I will show you that in a little bit. Right now, I have set the map to the earliest at this time, 1820. This is subject to change. There will probably be other layers. I have a little construction icon here because this is wildly incomplete. It is, the further back you go, the harder it is to find these records. And my goal is to tell you the story and tell you what was there at the time. So I have this little layer on, and I'm not sure the people in person can see as well because of the colors, but I can view all of these Northern Neck land grants, which Saffer and Sprouse at Fairfax and Loudoun in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s to map on paper, digitized, which is to say this is vector data. I can actually, these are drawn in software, and I can zoom in and out, and it doesn't actually change whether you can see them or not. And here we go. If you see where I'm hovering over, you can see that Frying Pan tract. It's pretty small on this map. This is 762 acres. This is owned by Robert Carter. And I'm going to show you one of the instruments is that there is, in fact, a deed plat from the Northern Neck land grant. And one of those maps that I just showed you on that previous slide, I have draped over this map, and you can see where they drew it and roughly where the copper mine would be, which is still not immensely precise, and it's still a bit of a mystery, but roughly where the Horsepen Run and Frying Pan Run meet. This is just due east of Route 28 near the airport.
Quick question, is Robert Carter the first the same as Robert King Carter?
Correct. Yes, there are a few, but yes, he's the big man. Um, yeah, so you can see there's some distortions on this map, and that's again because this was drawn with probably a quill, and they were pretty good. Their surveyors for the time were quite skilled. It didn't take that much distortion of this to drape it over a satellite accurate map for it to really work. So that is an example of something there. And if I want to read more about frying pan, I can actually click on frying pan right here. It brings up a nice little article. You can actually read pretty extensively a proper blurb. And each of these will have, if there is I'm a big fan of open information. If there's a Wikipedia link, you can actually click. That will open that right up so you can learn more about it. So let me go back to here. All right, I will move on with the presentation. So we're talking about maps. So the next big break would be 1827 or so. The big difference here is turnpikes. So the era of turnpikes corresponded roughly with, I guess, federal period architecture and I guess what they call the early republic. So this is between the Revolution and the War of 1812, which ended in 1815. And in 1802, there was a company called the Little River Turnpike Company that was formed by the Virginia General Assembly, sort of a private-public partnership. The turnpike itself took a long time to build. Most of these consider this the first form of highways in North America. And they had a specification of 20 feet wide, and they wanted this to go 34 miles from Alexandria to, I want to say, past Middleburg. And Alexandria being one of the biggest ports in America at the time, this was super useful to help ship materials back and forth. Slave labor was heavily used at the time per any large project of this scale. But this doubled the average speed of stagecoaches from 4 miles to 8 miles per hour, which is huge. We laugh at that today, but for lugging large haul materials, this is pretty revolutionary. Here's a painting from Thomas Balch that I guess depicts the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It would have looked something like that, probably a little bit more flat. On the right, we have this Herman Boye. I think he was a Danish cartographer who drew the Fairfax and Loudoun area at the time. This is depicting mostly Fairfax, but of what you can very clearly see, these really straight lines, these are the turnpikes. So on the top, this ended up becoming Route 7 or Leesburg Pike. This one here that you're seeing is Little River Turnpike, Route 50, which is largely what's important to this project. And there's a few other ones, the Warrenton Turnpike, which we now know as Route 29, among others. There's some early landmarks that show up on this map. One of them is the Frying Pan Baptist Church. So Robert Carter's grandson, King Carter's grandson, the Counselor Carter, was a big proponent of freedom of religion. He himself was a Baptist, which I guess was a kind of a different, considered of a different background, sort of a new thing at the time. And on the land that was bequeathed to him, past a couple of generations, he actually granted the Bull Run and Little River Baptist Church, I guess, parishes, some land for a meeting house. So in 1791, they built this. This was one of the first churches in the area where Black people were allowed to join this congregation. They were on the second level. It was still segregated, but nonetheless, that was a pretty new thing at the time. Another thing you'll see here, I circled here, is the CH, that's the courthouse. In 1799 or so, Fairfax built their courthouse on land that was owned by Richard Ratcliffe, also an aristocrat at the time. He founded Providence, which became Fairfax City. And most of the deeds and ledgers from both Leesburg or I should say Loudoun and for Fairfax, when you read them, they will show a distance. How many miles is this from the seat of government? So Leesburg, or how many miles is it from Fairfax? And each of them will say. There's a big jump here, but let me show you this on Heritage Dulles. So When we go to 1820, I'm just for a good measure, I'm going to turn off this layer so it's a little bit clearer to see. But you can see these this Little River Turnpike here, and this is this very long straight road, and you might notice that it kind of stands out compared to everything else.
Quick question, you're saying
sure.
the Little River Turnpike is 50 now, okay.
Yeah, so Little River Turnpike had there's a few different names over its period. What I'm referring to goes from at least Middleburg west, from the west down to Old Town Alexandria today. That path kind of remains unchanged. It's in various states of width and urbanization between these two. I think parts of it were called Route 236, parts of it are called Route 50. I think in the west it was called John Mosby Highway. In the Fairfax part it was called Lee Jackson Highway. These all started out as Little River Turnpike. The next big jump for cartography is around the Civil War. And one of the big things I'm going to talk about here are railroads. So railroads kind of revolutionized everything tenfold. The ones I'm going to talk about in this story are the Manassas Gap Railroad, which was chartered in 1850. Construction began in 1851, but it ended in 1857. There was kind of an economic depression at the time. Ties, which are the wooden planks that you notice that make up railroads today, were not laid at scale, but the earthworks were mostly completed. That's to say there are still pins that will show up in archaeological digs today. So there was a main line that, like the name says, Manassas Gap, kind of go from the city down to Manassas and further. And there was the Loudon Branch, which I think branched off just west of Fairfax City and would go through what is now Dulles Airport, through Arcola, and almost, I think, to Middleburg. These things were not actually finished. So there were neighboring railroads that were completed, the Orange and Alexandria, and the AL&H, so the which one of these became the WNOD, as we all well know. That ended service in 1968. The line that went to Manassas still this was another line that actually went down to Orange. That was completed and remains today an Amtrak line / VRE. So this is a map from the 1850s, and this shows these proposed MGRR Manassas Gap Railroad lines. You see, it's a little grainy on this projector, but you're seeing it says Centerville, it says Fairfax CH. I believe this says Broad Run, and you can sort of see this is roughly where the airport would be. This map on the right is one of my favorites. This is Nathaniel Mickler's map from 1864. I believe he was in the military, I think the Union military at the time. And this is a highly detailed map, probably used during the war, which depicts all of this stuff. So here, the straight line you're seeing on my mouse, my cursor, this is Little River Turnpike. And you might see it's a little bit small, but you can see the dashed railroad line, which was very much under construction, and that's all sort of halted. This map, I'm going to continue on. I circled all of these little dots. These all represent the main, I guess, residences or establishments on certain properties. Everything that's circled here actually shows up in Heritage Dulles. So you can see where they are down to maybe 100 feet. So there were a lot of cartographic advancements. Civil War activity was probably the big driver, right? If you are an officer and you need to make sure your troops are going to the correct places, they're going to be safe, you're for strategic reasons or otherwise, this played a role. Maps had dramatically higher granularity than before. You got landmark owners, you got tenant or owner names. So whoever lived there, I don't know if they own it, I don't know if they just live there. Their names are actually written down. They often describe the state of construction of roadways. So some of these are dashed. It might indicate this is a rougher road. Little River Turnpike was in pretty good shape for good reason. It's completely solid. It will even depict wooded areas. It will depict structures. And like I said, 17 of these at minimum show up on the website. So just post-war, something important to bring up is Black society. So after the war, newly gained freedoms kind of allowed the Black population of Virginia, which was pretty high, to start their own communities. During a time of segregation, they were sort of exclusive to everything was exclusive to their own, because certain people were not welcomed in other places. But like anyone else, these Black communities had churches, they had schools, they had public areas, places of communion, and there were established farmsteads that were present throughout the 20th century. Um, there are a couple, I guess, that I would like to bring up here. So Willard is a big one. Around the late 1890s or so, there was a community called Willard, which popped up roughly here, right on the line of Fairfax and Loudoun. And this is probably the biggest, most notable one, especially in recent history, that's been brought up. Willard unfortunately did not make it through the airport's construction, but there are a few others that did. Conklin is another one. This is not on this map, but right where Braddock, pretty close to where Braddock and Route 15 are, which is today's Aldi and South Riding communities. And up north, there was Cooktown near Flores. There was Squirrel Hill near Flores. And there's Oak Grove in Sterling. There are traces of these that still exist today. And I guess I wanted to name some names. You'll notice on this map in particular from 1878, this is a famous one. The Cook family were a Black family. They were affiliated with Israel Cook. He was a Black owner of 6 acres of land purchased from John Hanna, who was a retired Union vet in 1874. So one of the first churches in the area for the Black population was the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. It was established on this land. His son Henry Cook, his home actually stood till the 2010s. This doesn't stand anymore. Out in Chantilly on the Lower River Turnpike was the Chantilly Baptist Church and a school that was there. Coincidentally, the original building was renamed the Bell Cook Building, and that still stands today. So
I'm sorry, where is the white building? You say it still stands?
this guy still stands right near the interchange of Route 50 and Route 28, near that Costco over there. So there is a predominantly Black church there. It still stands, the Chantilly Baptist. And I think they use this as a storage building today, but it still stands. It dates to around 1880.
It's right there you can see it right on 50.
On Route 50.
Bypass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have the 6-lane highway, separation, congestion, and that building still stands. So I'm gonna fast forward here to 1870. And let's see. There we go. So using the aforementioned maps, we can actually turn this digital and we can make this quite precise. This is quite populated and I can zoom in a little bit further. So for example, here's Chantilly, and you can see lots of little landmarks. There was the what they called the colored school, the first Chantilly colored school, the Chantilly Episcopal Church. Around 1870 and 1880 is when these school systems started to exist. It was not the modern model of today, but this is one of the first drives towards a proper education system that was more formalized for most Americans. So if I go to Chantilly, I see some of this. If I go to Pleasant Valley, you will see something similar. There's a post office here. If I go down to Conklin, you can see the Conklin School. The names were not formalized at this, this was not formalized as the Conklin community at this time. It took maybe a decade later, but the schools are there nonetheless. If I go up, here you'll see Israel Cook. This was another Black community at the time that sprung up around this time. So this map is from 1870. So most of these roads and a lot of the landowners at this time are the same folks from the war. But I chose 1870 because I wanted to include a lot of the Black communities and landmarks that were notable for a predominantly Black population at the time. Yes.
So we have an online question.
Yes.
Is the Bell Cook Schoolhouse the one that was sadly defaced a few years ago?
That I'm not sure. If it's the one in Loudoun that you're thinking of, the answer is no. There was a schoolhouse, I believe, in Ashburn that a couple of years ago was defaced. I'm not sure the recent history of the Bell Cook building, but it's still there and it still looks as it is. So at the very least, it has been maintained.
I'm sorry, where is it again? At 15 and 50?
50 and 28. So over the Fairfax line. Yes.
This area of Pleasant Valley, is that where Dulles is now? What is Pleasant Valley today?
Good question. I will go into some of the towns, but I guess this is as good a time as any. So within my area of study, which is a very specific geographical, I guess, rectangle, there are 4 or 5. There are several different communities here, 6 communities here, that sort of encompass what is in and around Dulles today. So Pleasant Valley, I'm going to open this up. You can open it up. So in 1818, the Elijah Hutchison, who was a member of the Hutchison clan, which is a pretty big for founding families of Virginia family, they established a post office here, and I guess using their own tracts of land, became landlords to many agricultural tenants, and they established what was called Pleasant Valley. There is indeed a sort of a valley on Little River Turnpike on Route 50. You can still see it today. This would be just west of Chantilly, just east of Arcola/Gum Springs, and you can sort of see where that valley is today. So it had its own schoolhouses that were expanded upon. It had its own post office from 1818 onward, several stores, blacksmith shops, and all that, and its own Methodist church. Today, there's not much standing there except for this Methodist church, in fact. This sort of became, to answer your question, South Riding. So I think the name South Riding was probably legalized in the 1990s, but the development didn't really take off till about the 2000s. So there's a big residential community down there. 50 and Tall Cedars might be the intersection you're talking about. That is what we would have called Pleasant Valley up until, let's say, the 1970s or 80s. So this is as good a time as any. I was talking about the different instruments that were really useful for this project. So I was talking about press clippings, newspapers that had been digitized. You can actually go here and chronologically take a look at newspapers that mention or took place in Pleasant Valley. So in 1819, someone's saddlebags were stolen. There's a $20 reward. This is right at Cub Run. And if they found the thief or they found the goods, they were asked to leave them with Mr. Elijah Hutchison, who was the postmaster of Pleasant Valley. This is from 1819. In 1826, this is a little bit more sobering. There was a runaway slave who was jailed. He was living, let's say, he's the property of Widow Hutchison, and living near Centerville, Fairfax County, near Cub Run. So this would be roughly what we would consider Pleasant Valley today. 1922, it's a little bit later a topic. So bootleggers were prosecuted. There was an operation around the Pleasant Valley area. There was a tavern in Fairfax that it might have been supplying to. And it was apparently this operation was at Seymour Guthrie's place near Pleasant Valley. This is during a time of prohibition. So the 20s or so, this is 1922. In 1926, here's a dental notice. There was a dentist in Pleasant Valley. Dr. James Blevins, I guess, had retired. Dr. J.W. Marshall took his place. This happened at Rector's store. I can't imagine today going to a convenience store, going to the room in the back to get your fillings done. But this was a thing. This is from 1926. So in addition to, I've already shown you a couple of the community articles, but you can actually click on landmarks and learn about them. So in the Pleasant Valley area, I can click John Hutchison. You'll see this blue circle, and I get a nice little blurb about that landmark. In this case, it's the John Hutchison House. This still stands today. I think it's a realtor office. The earliest construction time frame for this is 1757. It's quite old. It still stands. It's a 2.5-story federal brick house with some additions made in 1820 and a kitchen in 1850. That press clipping that I showed you earlier. Okay, here's another one. Here's another press clipping. A runaway slave was jailed. Property of Widow Hutchison. This is the same one, I think, actually. This Widow Hutchison was a widow of, I guess, the man of the house at the time, who probably lived in this home.
I'm sorry, where's this house again?
So this is Route 50 and Pleasant Valley Road, their intersection right there. This will typically indicate that there were enslaved persons involved, as was the case for a lot of these, I guess, plantations at the time in the 18th and early 19th century. It tells you Pleasant Valley. It tells you that it was there, and it will link you this article. So you can link from one landmark to another article. Let me close this guy out, and let me open this back up. I'm sorry. Okay, so if I go back to 1870, I can also click some other landmarks. If you guys have heard of Sully Plantation, or I guess today we have slightly altered the name, but Sully was built in 1794 by Richard Bland Lee, who was one of the first, I think Virginia's first congressman, had this built on land belonging to his grandfather, which is one of the Northern Neck land grants. It was called Salisbury Plain by Henry Lee II. These were aristocrats. But you can read about Sully. You sort of see the who and the what. And I will sort of give you a brief history about what it is in the 18th century, the 19th century around the Civil War, and more modern history of it. This was actually saved when the airport was built and exists as a museum today, operated by the Fairfax County Park Authority. I'll give you a what. You know, it was first just 3,000 acres of timbered land. There was a federal period manor house that was built at the time, still stands today. And like I was saying earlier, there are press clippings. So there's a cute one. I don't know how to say this. Uis? I think they're ewes. All right. So I guess they're lambs. These were on sale. Francis Lightfoot Lee, who was Richard Bland Lee's cousin and also an aristocrat on his own right, I guess was selling ewes at the time from Sully. This is from 1814. This is a classifieds ad. In 1832, private education. There's a 10th session of my seminary for domestic instruction of youth. And let's see. Before the 1st of October, all communications to be made to me at Sully near Chantilly Post Office, Fairfax County, W.M. Brent Jr. So this is an advertisement for some private education. This is 1832. Yeah, so these are two examples of landmarks. You might have noticed there's these little squares, and they might be hard to see on the projector, but I can actually click photographs, and it will show you a photograph. It'll show you if someone else made it. I took this picture, so there's no attribution on this, but for other pictures, there will be an attribution. Here, there's an associated landmark. I can click Sully. It will open Sully up right here. And you can actually, if you want to know exactly where this photograph was taken, you can click this button. It will open Google Maps exactly to the latitude, longitude coordinates of where that is. Let's see. And if I go back here, I guess show you some more examples. So here's another one, Leeton. So Leeton was a federal period manor house, quite beautiful one, built in the 18 teens to 1820 by William Henry Harrison Fitzhugh. Fitzhugh and another founding family. If you read about any of this history, you will read about them. Yeah, and so this house was built in 1820 or so, and sort of stood as Sully's neighbor for about 2 centuries. It was a large Georgian mansion made of brick, 2.5 stories, 45 by 37 feet. And the way we know that is, in fact, there is an insurance policy that actually lays it all out for you. Here's a couple press clippings that talk about it. Public sale of land, part of the land in which Harrison Fitzhugh formerly resided, containing about 295 acres. This is from 1846. Land changed hands, as is the case. Unfortunately, when the airport was built, this was one of the losses. But I can click some of these pictures, and you can sort of zoom in a little bit. Here's another great angle. I really like this picture. Very beautiful. And you can click on this Google icon. Once again, it will show you exactly where this is. If you guys are familiar with the Air and Space Museum at Dulles, this is actually roughly near the parking lot. So right about where this pin was, if they had taken their camera at the time, probably lugging a big piece of hardware at the time. This is the picture that you would have gotten up until about 1960. Yes.
Did Francis Lightfoot Lee have property slash a house in Loudoun County? And if yes, is it known where it was located? Is it known?
I don't know the full answer for this, but given the context of the time, I would say yes and yes. I don't know it, but I'm sure that this is recorded. I would imagine Thomas Balch Library could probably help you out with this fact. Let's see. So where that copper mine was that I was talking about in the first few slides, arose this village called Frying Pan. We don't really know why this name came about. Maybe because this stream kind of looks like a frying pan in one of the earlier drawings. There are a lot of urban myths about this. I don't have an answer for you, but this was a thriving community before and after the Civil War. White Frying Pan was largely towards the southeast, and if you go northwest, you see these names Cook. This is the start of the Black community that arose in Frying Pan at the time. And this is what you're seeing, I should point out, is part of Ox Road. So this today is roughly the path of West Ox Road. This today is kind of gone. This path, the traces still exist and the property lines still exist. This connects to what became Old Ox Road in Sterling, which I think now intersects with Route 28, just north of here. All right, so I've shown you some landmarks. I've shown you some photographs. You are able to search. If I want to type in Sully, it will take you there. It will actually zoom you in, and you can click it there. There's some drawn plats I can show you. So I showed you one of the plats that was from 1729. Here's one from 1835. This is when Sophia Carter, who is Robert Carter's great-granddaughter, sold off some of this land in Frying Pan. So this is in 1835, and you can very clearly see the shape of the paper that has been rotated and distorted and stretched and squeezed to fit roughly where this would be today. Not that rough, but it's there. That's one deed. Let's see, what else is there? I can go to Shreve versus Warfield. This is a chancery case from 1866. So the Shreve family, if you're from, maybe if you even drove here, especially Ashburn and Route 7, you'll hear the name Shreve. This is a big family that owned a lot of land during the 19th century. One of them, I think Frances Shreve is her name, owned a plot here, which later became the National Weather Service at Sterling, which still stands today. So here you're seeing this paper that has sort of been plopped onto here, exactly over where it would be. I can actually click into this link right here, and it opens the chancery case itself. If you're all interested in the nitty-gritty. And this is Virginia, the Library of Virginia's chancery case database, and you can actually click and see through. I can go to the next page. I can go to the next plat and see all of this stuff. I'm gonna go back to my website. I think the last thing I want to go over here is the 1860 properties while we're still in the 19th century. So I was talking about the property lines, and I think I've shown you this briefly, but Saffer and Sprouse's work, I've sort of digitized onto here, and it's overlaid. And you can actually, in smaller text, it might not be super visible on the projector, but here it says, Charles W. Turley owned 1,418 acres. It will even tell you in smaller print where this is. So the will book X80 or deed book E3311, I think these are for Fairfax. If I go to Loudoun, I can go to James Holtzclaw, owned 508 acres here. 1847, 4Z259, that's probably the deed book and page. So that would be visible on any Loudoun County deed book.
I see the railroad there now.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not going to be the WOD. This is further south.
This is further south, correct. So this would have, I guess, within the scope of this project, this would have gone from Chantilly and Route 50 up through what is now the airport, right through it parallel to runway 12, or 30, I should say. It's both of those headings, right through Arcola at this time. So since we're on 1870, this is called Gum Springs, which we now know as Arcola. This is the main intersection at Gum Springs, and I believe William Palmer's store is still there, and this runs right north of it. Yes.
This is actually my question. What's your encompass like of your map, like how far west do you go, how far east?
How far north?
And how, yeah, north and
We,
south.
we go as far west as Arcola. We go as far north, just to the bottom of Brambleton, still a work in progress. It is not this bare in real life. To the northeast, we end roughly at where downtown Herndon begins. And to the southeast, we end at Chantilly and Stringfellow, roughly where Chantilly Library and High School exists today. You might wonder why Centerville and Herndon were left out of this. It was to reduce the scope, so there was less work to do, but also in particular because my goal was to talk about villages that were not talked about before. Downtown Herndon and Centerville are very, very well documented. Herndon in particular, you can go to the railroad station; it's a whole museum. And my goal here was to talk about stuff that just wasn't talked about before. Yes,
How long has it taken you to develop this project?
15 years. Yes, so this began as a high school project, became a project in school. I minored in GIS. I majored in computer science. That's how I built all this stuff. And later on the field, I learned how to sort of build these interactive maps. And this is just yet another one used for my fun. I think there's another question. Yeah.
Did you get grants to do this?
No.
You've just done this on your own?
Yes.
Very impressive.
Thank you. Okay. I think this is where I go back to the history. I'll try to keep things moving along. So 19 teens show a lot of 1910s, I should say, and aughts show a lot of cartographic advancements. There was how do I say this? There was increased accuracy and precision. A lot of new instruments involved. What are we seeing here? Yeah, so for this example, here's a topographic map by the USGS, which was recently founded at this time. And Robert B. Marshall, who was the chief geographer for the USGS in 1908, is actually listed here. R.B. Marshall, chief cartographer. And this was actually pretty revolutionary. Starting around the 1910s and onward, these maps became massively more precise and actually overlaid pretty well today. They're they're the most legible, and the modern tools and I guess patterns that you see on cartography today really start at this time. Around this time, this corresponds with rural free delivery, which is another reason you need maps. So both Loudoun and Fairfax had their rural delivery routes. So this would be what a rural free delivery carrier looks like at the time. And they use these routes to know which roads to go on first, which direction, and basically what route to take. So you had an equivalent for Loudoun and Fairfax. They're quite similar to what was there before. This was first suggested in 1889. It took a long time, but there was a 10,000 grant by Congress, which is a lot of money, in 1890 for this test, and this became commonplace in the decade after. I talked about Willard briefly, but it's a big part of this project. So in 1910, there was a vibrant Black community, and they called themselves Willard Crossroads. But there was, it was mixed. There was a Black community, there was a white community, and there were prominent Black families actually who farmed this land. Newmans, Corms, Baileys, to say a few. There was a lot of sharecropping. There were a lot of people that worked at farm hands at larger operations who would come home to Willard at the time. Like most of the villages here, the establishment of a post office really put you on the map. So in 1896, the Darn family, who was a pretty wealthy landowning white family, sold some land to Harvey Cockerill, who was a local who established this post office in 1896. There was a half-acre parcel. And Willard is kind of important because there was a noted lack of literature until recently. A lot of the digitization of records over the last 10 years helps us bring this to light. A lot of this I can actually attribute to the Thomas Balch Library. There was something called the Rust Archive. This contains the Kane files. So when Dulles Airport was built or was being planned and land was being acquired, this was the first time there was a really large scale records of properties, what was there, who lived there, how big these pieces of land were, to really survey what was to become of the airport. And smack dab in the center of the airport was Willard Crossroads. It was named after the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, notable businessman Joseph Edgar Willard. His dad was Joseph C. Willard, founder of the Willard Hotel. That was a big operation and still stands today in DC. Yes.
Using the word sharecroppers.
Yes.
Are you sure that that's accurate? Because sometimes I have found that people say sharecroppers, but what they mean is tenants.
Both. There are both tenant farmers and
Right.
sharecroppers.
And you are certain that in Willard, you're talking about sharecroppers.
To a degree, correct. Yes. I'm not the only one doing work on this. I should shout out to, I think, the Mason Legacies with George Mason University has done their own research on Willard as well. We've shared some information and they have some more details on this. We're in the 19 teens now, and I want to talk about Willard, so I'm going to go back to my website. So here we are, 1870. The second last year that you will see here is 1957. I'm going to click here. Now you'll notice that the map has changed once more, and it's kind of hard to see here, but this looks like a more modern topo map that you would see, a period correct topo map. And you'll see I'm so zoomed out, and this is a work in progress, that these labels are just crushing each other. There's just so much data here. And a lot of this is thanks to those Kane records, as well as digitization of cartography at the time. So here is Willard. Okay, this is not formal, but more white Willard would be over here. More black Willard would be over here. The church was really the greatest place of communion. And I'm going to click this picture right here. This is Shiloh Baptist Church. This was sort of the place where everything was centered around. The Black Willard School was established right next door. You can see some surveyors at the time in 1958 taking a look at this, but there was, a thriving community here. These were all black families who owned who owned or lived in these homes. Actually, a lot of times they were owned by black folks as well. And you can see little tidbits of their lives. They weren't necessarily on the top of the economic totem pole or anything like that. But this was a distinctive community. Some of these photos have never really been seen before this project. A lot of this came from the Kane archive, starting maybe a couple of years ago. So here's one example. This is down what we called Willard Road, and here's a house that was here. This is owned by the Hendersons at the time. Willard itself has its own little blurb, kind of what I told you about, that post office, talking about farm hands and all this stuff. And I can actually show you a picture of the Willard store, which we didn't really think existed. There was no picture of that before these Kane archives came to light, but we have it today. This was a 2-story folk style frame building measuring 16 by 32 by 17 feet. So we're pretty precise. Those Loudon Mutual Insurance documents from the, I want to say, turn of the century, we're able to shed this light because we know who owned it then. We know exactly where it was. We have these details. So I can actually click into this picture. You might have seen this shared on WUSA 9. This is a colorized photo. I colorized it, but this photo was taken from 1958. You can see a litany of mailboxes because the locals would go here to set that up. This door is enormous. This looks like a store if you look closely at it, but it also served as a residence most likely. I should also, let's see, I think this is when I go back to the slideshow. So I'm gonna keep going. In the 1930s, aviation really boomed. Obviously from the Wright Flyers in 1903 or so to 1930, there was a tremendous amount of movement forward in this realm. So this boomed in the 1930s despite the Great Depression. The airline industry just had just 6,000 passengers in 1930, had 500,000 in 1934. And there was the construction of passenger airports and general aviation airfields. So Serving the area was Hoover Field in 1926. This is 110 east of the Pentagon, pretty close to where DCA is today, but not quite. And there were these radio towers that were multi-purpose and contributed to aviation infrastructure. So this is what these little radio towers look like, and this was critical to that. Here's an early advertisement for TWA in 1930. Here's a sectional chart, which I believe shows Washington over here, but you'll also see something called Blue Ridge here. And the Arcola radio. And we might want this. This is sort of hard to read for the average layperson, but this points to this. In 1930s, in the 1930s, there was this. I guess the first airport in Loudoun County. Oh, here we go. Here's an ad. 1941 patronized Loudoun County's only airport, the Blue Ridge Airport. These were actually just two grass strips in the shape of an X, and this was just north of Willard. So to the bottom right is a Army Air Force directory photograph. This is an aerial photograph of the landing strip in 1945. Here's that same sectional chart. And I can actually show you this if you go up. So here is Blue Ridge Airport. Here's the little dashed X just east of Stallion Branch shows you where this was. This was just north of the Willard Main crossroads. You can go ahead and click on that and read a little blurb about this. So there was a parcel of land that Harry Sager leased. He was a pilot himself, and I think he became a commercial pilot after this. There was two grass strips between 2,000 and 3,000 feet in the shape of an X. There was two hangars on his shack. It's not really what you would call an airport today, but for back then, it served its purpose. Here's that same advertisement that
So where's 28? Way over to the right?
Yeah, so I will show you that in momentarily. 28 would be right here running north-south.
So the airstrip now is Dulles Airport.
Yeah, so what would be the airstrip today, and I will show you this, is pretty much paved over, roughly where FedEx and UPS have their freight terminals, pretty close to Saranand Circle where you go and pick up your folks. That's about where the airport, quote unquote, had stood. There was another airfield in the area. Arcola had its own Glasscock airfield. This actually stood until the 90s or so. I remember this growing up. And I'm going to actually fly around and show you. So you can see that right here. This is Route 50 and Arcola Road. This might be called Gum Spring Road today. This is very close to Tall Cedars and South Riding. If I go down here to Centerville, there's Centerville Airport, very similar. These were all pretty much just grass strips and a few Piper Cubs. But these, serve their purpose during a time of very quickly growing aviation as a means of commerce and hobby and passenger flight. This is right across the road from what is now Cox's Farms. So this is Braddock. This is Pleasant Valley. This intersection still exists today. There's a roundabout here, I believe. All right. So I guess I'll move on. So we're going to jump a little bit and we're going to talk about suburbia. So there was this marked shift from an agricultural locale to a suburb of DC. The federal government at this time during the Cold War expanded very rapidly and very to a degree never seen before. It demanded the construction of housing. The GI Bill it aided education and attainment for housing of veterans of World War II. Unfortunately, this was exclusionary to Black veterans, but nonetheless, it drove a tremendous amount of growth here, and a lot of people made their home in the Dulles area. White flight is something I can't ignore. This was a big thing. There was an exodus of white families to the suburbs, and that helped contribute to this. Western Fairfax and Eastern Loudoun were still rural holdouts at the time, but this rapidly changed. There were mass-produced single-family home developments by Levitt & Sons around America. The first one, you might be familiar with Levittown. That same company actually built some very similar homes in Chantilly. So I believe what is now known as, I forget the name, Greenbrier. So the Greenbrier development is by Levitt & Sons, just like Levittown. So you're seeing, let me put that back. You're seeing here an advertisement, GI Bill 1945, some of those homes in 1950, And there were actually planned communities around the area where they were going to build single family homes, but they were never really built. Around this time, you're starting to see, you see these little patterned dots. This looks like a modern suburban street, and indeed, these were the first examples of it. Here's an example in Willard. Unfortunately for these lovely folks, they had to give up their homes and were compensated by the federal government because Willard was no more after 1958. Some of these homes were actually moved. In Chantilly, a lot of these still stand. Here's one in Pleasant Valley, Fairwood Estates. Fairwood Estates does not exist. This is now, I think, a Fairfax County Police training facility. Let's go. Cartographic advancements. We're going to talk about that again. So they're modern triangulation techniques. On the bottom right, you see this very large doohickey. It's called a stereoplanograph. The American Society of Photogrammetry owned several of these and did a lot of research, and these helped to further make these maps what you know today. So this particular map from 1956 even says topography from aerial photographs by stereoplanograph. How do they work? I couldn't tell you, I'm not a cartographer, but this is sort of a lost art as satellites have sort of taken over. This is where we finally get to what this is all named after. So growing population, growing federal government, growing, I guess, federal apparatus brought about the need for a new Washington airport. So what is now known as Reagan National Airport today, DCA, did stand at that time, but was quickly becoming quite congested, remains congested today. And the rapid development of jet aircraft necessitated something bigger, something newer. So in 1950, the Washington Airport Act was passed by Congress, providing funding for a new airport in the region. The FAA, which was called the Civil Aeronautics Administration at the time, they initially proposed Burke. But Burke was homed to a lot of moneyed folk. There was a lot of protest from residents, and this forced a shift to Willard, which is not quite as moneyed a community. So along the Fairfax County border, Fairfax-Loudoun border, they landed upon this proposed footprint in 1958. So this is roughly what Dulles looks like today. There's an addition of a runway right after this, but you can see the named roads. Here's Route 50 once again, dead straight, Little River Turnpike. The president of the time was Dwight D. Eisenhower. The special advisor for Elwood Quesada, for aviation was Elwood Quesada. I think he was more involved with some of these technical decisions. So what are the ramifications of this? So 10,000 acres were to be cleared, 160 homes and countless associated structures. A lot of these, which has stood since the 18th century, would be demolished. So there was massive protests over this, over the demolition of largely the higher profile historic homes and farms. And this was not undocumented. In the Northern Virginia Sun in January of 58, went ahead and published all these photos. There are numerous structures here. Lots of them were home to families for generations. They documented some of these historical homes. This article in particular talks about Sully and Leeton, which I had shown you before. There was a big fight to save both of them. They were not both saved. One of them was saved. On the right, I talked about some of these houses being moved. This, in fact, was a thing. House moving is a prohibitively expensive operation today, but was slightly more commonplace at the time. So a lot of those homes, especially the ones built in those little subdivisions, were moved miraculously. You can actually see an example here. This was a home by the Harrison family that was moved and put on stilts and basically trucked over elsewhere. I think this landed in Herndon, in downtown Herndon, what is now downtown Herndon today.
So the houses that were moved were spread out to other places. They didn't
Correct.
continue as a
Yes.
community.
And despite it being a little more affordable then, it was not a cheap process. So the majority of structures were demolished nonetheless. The federal government commenced operations for all these properties as part of Civil Action 1638M. Now, I was talking about the Kane files that the Balch Library actually houses. This is roughly when those were recorded. And a lot of these records were just put in storage for 50 years. It took a long time. Even when I started this project, these were not available to the public. And it's happening. It's happening very quickly. And Willard Crossroads was no more. It was demolished. Shiloh Baptist Church, which is that black church, which is really the focal point of Willard, they were given $4,000 to relocate their graveyard and their congregation to a newer building in Conklin. It's unlikely that that was enough to really do the job, and it's unlikely that they got all of the graves. Unfortunately, some of these, there's some photos here. Here's this lady, Rose Morris, elderly lady. I think she had lost her children in World War II. She lived in Burke, and when the CAA initially put out their plan to build an airport at Burke, they had built the Burke Lake, and construction actually, sort of preparational construction had began, and she sold her home, and she bought a home in Willard, this beautiful 1850s farmhouse, plot of land, only to be told a couple of years later, I'm sorry, but you can't live here. In 1960, here's a Washington Post clipped piece, bulldozers plow Chantilly fields. And here you can see at the foot of someone's driveway, here's a Washington Post labeled, actually little newspaper mailbox that's being torn down. And you can see where there used to be a home, a very large tree, and construction equipment. Construction. So this is all pretty new. Dulles was one of the first airports in America that was actually built for jet aircraft. All the runways, two of them I think were 10,000 feet. One of them is 9,000 something feet. And this was a massive operation. To name some things, I guess massive amounts of plumbing had occurred. So in rural areas and even today, we struggle with handling wastewater, runoff, and all sorts of stuff. And this was the first time, this was a big driver in Fairfax and Loudoun County for a lot of these modern systems to be built. So that had happened. Electricity, telephones, all of this stuff had sort of driven a lot of the growth of infrastructure here. So one of the contractors that was integral to building these runways was C.J. Langenfelder and Sons. They had these large wheeled vehicles that would just take concrete and make these large slabs and reinforce them. Here's an advertisement on the Falls Church Sun Echo saying, "Season's greetings. We are building runways at your great new Dulles International Airport." This is a picture that was donated for use of this. This is Amy Muller's parents standing on, I think, what became runway 1. This was just, people would recreationally go here and watch. It's a lot less security than exists today. All right, so this opened in 1962. It was named after John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower. He had recently passed. And it was centered around this main terminal. It was designed by a famous Finnish architect. He unfortunately passed away before it was finished, but the St. Louis Arch, among other much more interesting buildings than the St. Louis Arch, were designed by Saarinen. It was primarily for commercial jet aircraft, and it pioneered these mobile lounges for passenger shuttling. This is much more controversial today than it was back then. And the dedication speech was done by Kennedy, who is right here. Here's a picture of Dulles Airport's first 3 runways. This is in 1962 by MWA. I'm going to go ahead and, let me finish this up. Okay. So the rest of this is history. Many people in this room might remember, as this all happened. So between 1970 and now, housing subdivisions really took over the landscape, and many of these subdivisions actually took the names of the farms that replaced them, whose operations had actually ceased a decade or 2 prior. So here I have a chart of Fairfax and Loudoun County based on the USDA Census Report. In 1959, Fairfax County had 62,291 acres of farmland, or land designated as such. Loudoun County, much more, 252,681. Fast forward to today, we only have 3,600 acres of farmland in Fairfax and 110,000 acres roughly in Loudoun. And Loudoun is especially interesting because the western half just has a very different character from the eastern half. just as things have grown and changed. In the 80s and 90s, you would see this sort of pattern that would happen. I would say this pattern actually started in the 60s and 70s in Fairfax, and more so in the 80s and 90s in Loudon. But farmland would be sold to speculators. The speculators would sell to a development company. And in the private sector, they would build housing subdivisions or commercial properties. It could be retail, it could be offices, could be medical, small scale industrial. In the public sector, sometimes the counties would purchase the land, build a school, build a fire EMS, build libraries, build parks, and widen and build new roads. And that's sort of the pattern that you see of development in the area. The end result is really the newer communities that you see today, where new residents get to live the suburban life. So here's an example on the left. This is the ruins of Little Sully. I think that became right next to it is this, which is a subdivision in Chantilly that looks like most subdivisions in Fairfax and Loudoun County. So the biggest driver for this is probably the federal government. Employment is largely by the government and federal government contractors. At least in the beginning, the place of employment would largely be closer to Washington. It would be in a exurb. It would be in Arlington or Tyson's Corner or the city itself, and people would live out here. Things started to change though in the 1990s and 2000s. Many of us remember this, but maybe didn't hear about this. So the development of the ARPANET, which was a federal government experiment, led to the creation of the World Wide Web as we know it. And the first internet exchange point, it was called May East. It was located in Vienna. And then there were satellite campuses for that in Ashburn. So there's these, you guys might have heard of submarine cables, which would carry telephone and stuff and eventually carry data. And that's what we have today. We basically have that under the Dulles Access Road, 267 and up the Greenway. And along this route emerged the Dulles Technology Corridor. So this was a specialized zoning project done by Fairfax County, where they built these business clusters that largely worked in telecom. And by the 90s, this was called the Silicon Valley of the East. So some earlier tech companies that moved here were AOL, MCI, and made their headquarters here. Some later examples that we now know today, more contemporary, Amazon's AWS, Google, Lighthouse, Mantech. These are big name, not only federal contractors, but also just private sector, and basically are the backbone of the internet as we know it today. Northern Virginia's GDP, and I don't think people quite realize it, but if Northern Virginia was a country, it would be the 48th largest economy in the world, which is no slouch. The GDP of Northern Virginia is 276 billion. A lot of this is based in the Dulles area, thanks to the Dulles Technology Corridor. For some reference, the population of DC in 1870, which is one of my slides, right, is 131,700. But the population of these zip codes, 20171, 20151, 20166, 20152, 20248, which is basically all of this, alone is 145,000 in 2020. We see a changing landscape in recent years. Land values have become too high to build single-family homes in the eastern half of this area. And so we start seeing mixed-use development emerge in the late 2000s and 2010s. So where you have retail on bottom, housing on top. This is all characteristics of urbanization surfacing. So this is no longer, at least the eastern part of the Dulles Corridor, in my opinion, would no longer accurately be just considered suburbs. We're starting to get into urban. A great sign of this is WMATA's Silver Line Rapid Transit. It was a boondoggle for phase 2, which opened in 2022, but nonetheless, it did finish. And now we have rapid transit going from the city all the way out to Ashburn, which was probably unheard of only by most people, and only a select few would have envisioned this.
It's still a boondoggle though.
Oh yeah, but still works. With all this stuff though, you see a changing landscape and a changing culture. So in 1990, George H.W. Bush signed the Immigration Act of 1990, creating the H-1B visa. As I was talking about, there was a growing tech sector, a growing federal government and contracting apparatus, and growing the growth of the internet, really. Some people better written than me could probably write articles about how the growth of Northern Virginia is the growth of the internet. And so this large federal and tech sector needed people. And this was seen by the powers that be in the 80s, 90s, and today. And so a lot of immigration occurred, and a lot of people came to Northern Virginia to work in the tech sector. And this is just the reality of it. Herndon Chantilly is now a haven for those companies. And a lot of these people, especially South Asian and East Asian communities, have made their home in Dulles, in the Dulles area. And this suburban life is in stark contrast to what was there before. But this is the modern, version of living in the region. And there are some perks to this. South Asian and East Asian cuisine, I don't know if people realize this, but Northern Virginia, especially the Dulles area, has some of the highest rated cuisine in America. There are, and with this, there's a lot of communities, places of worship, community centers that have been established in the Dulles area. And we see basically, I think these pictures sort of sum it up, where this is something that people even 50 years ago most likely could not envision this happening. The whole model of commuting to the city kind of reversed in many ways when a lot of these headquarters made their homes in places like Herndon and Reston and Ashburn. And that is unprecedented. So this is, new territory, and this is part of a much bigger metropolis. So that's the end of my little history part of it. I'm going to go ahead and play around with this website and show you a little bit more.
Show me where 28 is.
Yeah.
Or when was 28 built?
All right, here. This is where I'll show you and answer all your questions. So here's 1957. I picked this year because it's right before construction began in 1958, and I can go to today. This is a map that if you take a look at maps today, this is familiar to you. So what you're seeing on the right is Route 28. Oh, let's go here. And you can see it kind of go up northbound, straight north and south along here. Here's this interchange with 267. Here's the circle at the airport. Here's the airports. Here's the 4 runways. This is run 9, 1C, 1L, runway 12. And this is kind of the sobering part of the story is when I go from 57 and I go to today, a lot of these blue landmarks, most of them are gone. The modern interpretations of historic preservation took many decades to develop, and these were just not a priority at the time. A lot of places were just people would take a wrecking ball to it without even thinking that this might be a rare glimpse into a past that is so far away today. But for this purpose, I've left these pictures here, so you can still, even though those landmarks disappear in the today, I can actually hover over and we're going to go to this runway. And here you go. Here's Willard. So I can click over here and see that this was, there was a church here, but today it's probably just Jet Blast. Here's the Willard store. And today I think is where they do some maintenance on aircraft.
And where was Lee?
Leeton would have been right down here. So here's the Udvar Hazy Center. And here's the parking lot, which is, it's a beloved museum by all. And right next to it was this home, was Leeton's beautiful Georgian mansion, which didn't make it, unfortunately. Yes.
So was 28 built contiguous to the airport?
Correct.
From 66 was in, I think,
around that
mid-60s.
Yes, I think 66
right
outside of Beltway. This is around the same time. Correct. So 28 was built as one of the main thoroughfares that would go up. 267 was a much bigger operation. A lot of, almost as many farms and farmsteads were demolished for that as well. But
didn't 28 already exist as Sully Road, one lane either direction?
28 existed past Centerville into Manassas. That existed before.
Went south.
Yeah, it was south, not north.
But the northbound portion that you're seeing here, which is straight and wide, That's something that couldn't be done in the century prior, but today with modern earthworks, 60 years ago with modern earthworks, they were able to do this.
So I remember when it was one lane each direction.
Yeah,
So-
right, yeah.
So here's a misnomer. What you're seeing here is just to the right of 28 is Walney Road, and just north of it is called Centerville Road. This goes up through Chantilly and Herndon. This was called Route 28 between, let's say, the 19 teens and 1962. After that, they renamed it to Route 657, and I think they might have I think it's still called that. And then they named Sully Road, which is this big, massive, straight thoroughfare, Route 28.
So it didn't get built, I know you had a question, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The 28 from 50 didn't go, they didn't build that until the airport started being built?
Correct.
Okay, from that continuation up.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to the 1957, if I go to the 1957 area, remember, this is quite precise. It's not going to suddenly zoom out on you, suddenly shift. If I go to 1957, you will see there was only this one thoroughfare. This is what is now Centerville Road and Walney Road, which is largely the same as today. Except here, this is all bisected by that huge highway. This is all obliterated for the airport. And a lot of these places just didn't make it, let's say. There's some notable ones I want to point out. This is the obituary portion. So Leeton is one of them, right? This is a beautiful Georgian mansion that was lost. I want to point out another one. This is the Hyde Farm. It doesn't have a formal name, but kind of like it looked a lot like Sully. This is built in the 1820s. The sheriff of Loudoun County at the time, Johnston Cleveland, it was under his ownership when this mansion was built. So this is a pretty stately home, I should say. And this is what that looked like. This did not make it. They had a tenant house as well. So this whole portion became, I think, what is now the tank farm right off 28 by the substation. So where Frying Pan Road interchange with Route 28, that's where that is. Here's another one. If I go to 1957, there's this farm, Stone Street Farm. I'm not going to point out all of these landmarks. You can do that on your time. But in 1798, Ludwell Lee, who was an aristocrat of his own right. Yeah, here's his Wikipedia page. He leased this land to a Basil Stone Street. And a lot of these leases included an agreement where they needed to build and operate a farm. And they would even specify, I need you to build a house 16 feet square. These would not be torn down. And this continued to be farmed until about 1958. And I think the last owners were James T. Moran. Moran is a name you might have heard of, these roads around here, Moran Road and all that. There's a large 2-story frame dwelling by 1958, attached to a 1.5 story, 16 by 16 frame dwelling, which is most likely that original 1798 or so building. And I can actually click here, and it's most likely that, which is obscured by this little shed right here. So if I go up. There you go.
If Dallas was open in 62, construction started what, 58?
58, yeah.
Do you know who the construction workers were for Dulles? Black, white, mixed from the area?
I think it was largely white, largely from the area. But there was a lot of specialized new technology involved in building these runways, and especially the concrete architecture for the main terminal itself, which we all know, that required a lot of specialized folks who did come from elsewhere to do this job. The last obituary I'm going to post here, I'm going to show you, is the Black Welder House. So in 1765, there was a gentleman, William Barr, who was actually a Revolutionary War soldier. I will eventually have an insignia for that. He rented this land out. Just like I was showing you the other example before, part of this lease was to a Charles Stewart Presley, and he was to build essential structures, including a dwelling house, tobacco hut, an orchard of apple trees. And in 1958, at this property was a 2-story dwelling made of hewn logs, 16 by 20 by 16, which is exactly as stated in that original deed, and a 1.5-story frame wing attached to it. And if I go ahead and show you this picture, you can very much see what is most likely that original structure. So this would have been from between 1765 and 1770. And here's a newer part of the house which isn't sinking. And this was used as, I think, a country equestrian property. You can see these beautiful figurines. You can see these nice equestrian designs on the doors. So quite a lot of work went into some of this. Unfortunately, this house did not make it either. Today, I can't fathom something like this being demolished willy-nilly based on its age alone.
Yeah, but unfortunately.
So if I go to today, so here's the Blackwater House. I'm gonna zoom right in. Go to today, and this is smack dab on the middle of runway 1230. So under that concrete today is the remains of this farmstead, which dates back to earlier than this country was founded, really.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, we have a backlog on here.
Sure.
So I'll start with the questions, because we do have a couple comments as well.
Sure.
Do we know the internet hubs in Loudoun County? You covered one in Vienna and Fairfax, but how about Loudoun?
So I broadly talked about May East. So Ashburn was the third campus, I think, of that. That was a big fiber optic hub, which was the backbone of a lot of the early internet, especially on the eastern seaboard. I can't talk in depth about what comes after that, but a lot comes after that, and this is the history that is still ongoing.
And then another question, is there any pictures of Henry Lee property / home that showed up on the map? And is Henry Lee relative of the Lees at Sully Plantation?
Correct. Henry Lee II is the first owner of that Northern Neck land grant, which so it's kind of hard to see here, but let me go back to a more sparse time. Let me go to 1870. So here's Henry Lee's 33,111 acres called Salisbury Plain. There's a few historical markers around it, but Sully, which was the main house there, still stands. And Sully was built by Richard Blandly, who was Henry Lee's, I think, one of his grandsons, and the first congressman from Virginia. So that still stands. And I believe Richard Blandly's, one of his nephews is Robert E. Lee. So this family goes back quite far. Actually, this is a great segue, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I wrote an article, and there will be articles made, but here's one that's very incomplete. But here's a list of, I talk about aristocracy, direct descendants of English and Scottish peerage and landed gentry. And if you're not sure what those are, you can click into each of these and learn more about it. But here's some examples. So Carter, descendants of Sir Richard Croxton Carter of Watford and Kings Langley. This is 1490 to 1558. What I tried to do is find the most recent member of peerage and link them to owners or tenants of land in the area, mostly owners. And anything highlighted in yellow will actually take you to something that's here, something actionable. So if I scroll,
Related to the people, Carter's Grove Plantation outside of Williamsburg?
I would say yes.
Sure, Plantation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Fitzhugh, descendants of Honorable William Fitzhugh, 1570 to 1633. Lee, Sir John Lee, Esquire of Coton Hall, 1530 to 1605. And these are all people who had holdings here or even lived here. Anything highlighted in yellow will actually link to a landmark, which is within the Dulles area. That one. Here we go. So one such landmark is the Hermitage. So this was built by most likely Lancelot Lee and his children. Well, there was probably an early structure, but the house that was there until this 1976 was built by them, the Hermitage. But that's just one example. There's Sully, there's Avon, which is another one. This was Richard Blandly's brother, and later this was home to Richard Cockerell, who was a very prominent judge in the area. And the only picture we have is this very fuzzy picture, and you can see the Mount Vernon style pillars on this aerial photograph from 37. This unfortunately did not last through the 60s. And today I think there's Sullyfield Business Park. So these are some examples of descendants of peerage and sometimes peerage themselves. I'll try to incorporate a picture when I can. This is incomplete. There's always more, but these are just some. Next question, I'm sorry.
So now it's just comments. The first one I'll say is this presentation would be great for high school students in Loudoun County so they could see and therefore understand the history of our county. And then there is a gentleman, sorry. His best friend Jay in elementary school, late 1960s in Falls Church, had a father, James Motley, who said he helped design IAD. Mr. Motley used to take Jay and I to the Leesburg airport to fly us around the region in a Piper
Nice.
Cub.
Good to know.
And then, same man, high school kids in the 1970s used ARP, a net to connect to some university computers. At MIT, the labs there welcomed us kids. MITRE in McLean had the ARPA net dial-up.
Yes.
It was a local call.
Yep. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Yes.
Do you know of other people in other parts of our country that are doing something similar to what you've done? Because I mean, there's just hundreds and hundreds of places like this.
I'm sure they exist, but I don't know of anyone who's working super in parallel with me on this. My hope is that I'm a software engineer by trade. So I made this whole system and I've designed it such that I could probably make this for another place and name it something else.
Right, so how do I get this?
Yeah,
Historicdulles.com?
this is heritagedulles.com. But the idea is that this is a museum, right? So you have these little landmarks and these little pictures. I could actually build this for anywhere if I wanted to. This was just my pet project.
The time and everything else, I come at this from a historian.
Sure.
Because,
You're the expert on that.
well, no, not anymore. I was doing this in the 90s to the 2000s in
Sure.
South Carolina. And
Yeah.
so applied history, museum studies, that's where I come from it.
Mhm.
And my son is actually at Radford University
Mhm.
looking into something similar, working at the archives there. And
Sure.
it's just I've been out of the game for so long.
Yep.
And it is fascinating to me. And also I'm extremely jealous. You're talking about, I had to go in and read those 1700s and read
It's
those
not-
and
it's
learn
not
how
easy.
to read it and learn that an F
Yeah.
is actually an S. and
Yeah, I'm
all of those things. So now to see it, and I kid my son all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, you just go to the computer and read it. You don't know how to do research.
Oh, no, and it's, I would say it's gone beyond that, where we're now getting to the point where the computer can read it and give you it in Times New Roman. I can read it out.
And that's
Which saves a lot of time because I'm not too quick. I'm a pretty fast reader normally. Reading some of this.
Well, and
it's horrible.
And to give credit where it's due, you've gone, I mean, we've seen him here at Thomas Balch Library going through these archival collections. So not everything is online,
Yeah.
but
No.
Gibran's work here is making it more accessible. And I will plug him. He is definitely cutting edge, and hopefully this is where the history field can go.
That's what I'm seeing, and
yeah.
that's why I was curious to know if you've met other people in different fields where you're seeing more of this happening. I assume it is, but I just didn't know if you knew personally.
I would say that all the little pieces, I have met people working on all of those things. The digitization of deeds, the OCR, all that stuff, the machine learning that's doing all this and making it all quick, the archival of the newspapers. But putting it all together on an app like this, I have not really seen it yet.
By any chance, was this recorded?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Yes, it will be after today and maybe a couple days because the person who usually does it's out. But we will have it on our YouTube channel at Thomas Balch Library.
So go to YouTube and then go.
Thomas Balch Library, and then it'll be Heritage Dulles presentation.
Great.
It's just amazing what it does is it allows you to visualize history.
Mhm.
And then also the way that you laid it out by period, the transportation and communications have just been central to Loudoun's history.
Yeah.
And this really, I've heard that.
Yeah.
But now I really get it.
Yeah. And something that bothered me because I grew up in near Herndon. So something that bothered me was hearing, oh yeah, lots of Civil War history happened here. I'm like, okay, where? And this sort of tells you a little bit more about that. And something I don't have time to talk about here specifically, but I think I mentioned in some of these articles that For example, John S. Mosby, who was a very prominent, I think, protege of Jeb Stuart for the Confederate forces. He pioneered what is known as guerrilla warfare in North America. And he has memoirs where he talks about his troops falling back from Chantilly, going along Little River Turnpike and hiding in the woods by Kings Branch. So that would literally be right here near the home of Woolsey Green. There's lots of little examples of that from literal memoirs that were written after the war or even during the war.
You can go further back than that, and
Yeah.
during the Revolutionary
Mhm.
War, you've got Nathaniel Greene, and you have got the Swamp Fox in South Carolina,
Mhm.
doing the same types of
Yeah,
things.
yeah. I found that
It's fascinating.
I'm not a Civil War buff. I don't know, like that's not my area of study, but I found that by and large that takes up the lore of the area. I don't know that much about the revolutionary stuff, and I'm curious to see what comes out as we digitize more and more of these records become accessible. There's another thing I think I want to say. Let's say I think I wrote about it in Frying Pan. Blah blah blah. 18. Here we go. In 1861, there is a diary by Jeb Stuart himself, the General J.E.B. Stuart's cavalry. They were outgunned at the Battle of Drainesville, just north of Herndon, and then fell back literally on this road, and they treated the wounded at Frying Pan Meeting House. So you can imagine outside of here, cavalry forces who were being patched up after a raid that didn't go very well. What did he say? 143 were wounded, cared for at this meeting house. So there are things like that. Today, actually, there's this boulder. It's a little rock in the ground, but apparently this was a meeting place for John Singleton Mosby and Laura Ratcliffe, who was a young aristocratic lady who basically sent notes and would give tips to his troops. And that's still demarcated. And that road path doesn't really exist today. If you look at it on the today view, this is just in the middle of a bunch of townhouses. But if you go back then, you can see that it was on the main Ox Road right here.
It's by a church, an old church back there.
Yeah, so Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, which was the black church I was talking about, actually built their newer property right here in about 2000. Yes.
One of the things, I'm from Southwest Virginia,
Sure.
Tazewell County, but I've always been fascinated with something like this. And I'm old school and simple. Can acetate prints be made where you would put one layer and then be able to overlay with the sheet and just see it being built up where you physically see, all right, this is 1750, lay the next acetate over, see it as it built up.
Yeah, I mean,
Current.
so that notion that you're talking about, that was basically what I was going for here, right? Because I have seen certain examples of that on an overhead projector, and you got your little transparencies, and you can kind of overlay it. What I'm trying to do is basically that, just in this format. So I would say, yeah,
In a larger scale, we
Yeah.
could actually say, pack up, and someone mentioned a high school on the internet there.
Mhm.
You could take it to
Yeah.
Loudoun County
So I
High
think
School and say this was in development.
Unfortunately, one of the limiting factors is the equipment to get that available and transportable. I think is now it's gotten hard. So my goal is to do basically that, but here, this is a little bit one thing I might try to do is there's a lot. I'm not a stranger to the fact that you load this up and you're like, wow, this is a lot going on here. It's a lot of names. One of the things I will probably try to do is make a version of this, or I can switch it off and I can make it a little bit more like what you would see in that example, where you have acetate sheets layering over each other. Yeah.
I did just have old school, just being able to physically.
Oh, it's
Okay,
hey, there's no doubt that's probably more satisfying than clicking a little mouse button and seeing it. So, yeah. Anything else?
I had a data center
Sure.
situation. All these data centers in Loudoun County.
Yep.
Somebody told me there was a main thing, maybe it's the AOL, something like that. The closer you come to that terminal, the better. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, data centers, as we know, is a very controversial topic these days. They pay a lot of taxes. So Eastern Loudoun, as you guys know, is now inundated with data centers. They're not particularly pretty. But they take up everything. And I think what whoever you're speaking to is alluding to is most likely that those fiber optic lines that are running under the Dulles Toll Road that were first laid in the 70s or 80s and now have been expanded upon. One of the terminuses, or one of the main hubs for that is what is formerly the AOL campus, and I believe also the former MCI, now Verizon campus. It's a big building, maybe half a mile north of where this map ends. And yes, there is some truth to the fact that if you build closer to that, you shave off a couple of milliseconds of latency
That's what I
when you
heard,
click on something. And what people don't realize is, we're all on our social media today and our cloud email accounts and YouTube, all this stuff, that cloud that it lives in is distributed along these data centers. So in a way, Northern Virginia is the physical footprint of that, actually, for most of the Eastern Seaboard, even worldwide.
As someone who lives in Percival, Virginia, who left to go to New Zealand for 3 years in 2015 and came back and thought, I'm gonna have great internet service when I get back to my town. And it was worse than ever before because they had to take the cell tower off the water tower. We still have, I finally got it working, but literally at my house, I have no cell phone reception. I have to do Wi-Fi only.
Yeah.
And I'm still amazed that the growth that's going on out there and the people that are living out there are the people that are working and doing all of this. But they go out home and their internet is still not really great.
For better or for worse.
All the water tower came down, maybe.
They cleaned the water tower and they put the cell phone tower back up, but literally, if I have a workman come to my house and they're all the time, I can't get cell service. And I'm like, no, you can't. That's just my life. So, they are planning to build a new cell tower, probably in my backyard, basically. And I have neighbors who don't want it there. And I'm like, yeah, you get cell service. I literally don't. And I mean, it's literally someone that lives across the street from me gets cell service and I don't. It's just the way my house is situated. Anyway, I know that nobody really cares, but it's just funny to me to see the growth out where I live.
The stark contrast between the western half, everything west of 15 versus east of 15, for better or for worse, it will probably become developed. The upside being your problem will hopefully not be a problem in 5 years. The downside being this landscape is now littered with warehouses, which hopefully won't exist. According to the Loudoun County development officials, it won't exist. These aren't going to be here forever. But
and we have seen a huge difference in when there are thunderstorms, lightning storms in the area and the power goes out. The power goes out more frequently than it used to and takes longer to come on. And a lot of it is due to these data centers.
Ironically, on the other side, here near Dulles, the power grid is extremely strong.
Of course.
Full disclosure, my folks live within this area and they haven't had a power outage in 10 years.
Yes.
Crazy.
We get it a lot.
Yeah. Think since I started this project though, like things have changed. And some good examples are some of these photographs. Like this house does not exist. I took this, I think I just got my driver's license. I took this picture. This is no longer there. There's a few data centers here as well as a DESA auto auction. There's some other, let's see, are there some other casualties of this? I took this picture. This is the Lanham House. This dates back to pre-Civil War. This was demolished 5 years ago, maybe. And apparently most of our cola there was some of the naming came from this. Gum Spring Farm might have been this farm. What else is there here? This was Waterworks Supply of Virginia, which was built on a Hutchison descendants homestead in 1890 something. I took a picture of this. This is gone now. And there are data centers just about near there. So things are changing. And, part of this, I guess, one of the big statements I'll say here is this is meant to immortalize a lot of this stuff as well. And if it doesn't exist in a physical reality, it will exist in a digital reality. And there are there's a lot of movement forward, and I foresee a lot of interesting things happening in the future, especially with 3D worlds and stuff that virtual reality. And this all sounds pie in the sky, but this is what will come for a lot of.
Do you have any intention to go for the western Loudoun County? Because, first of all, there are a lot of historic African American communities out.
Sure.
Do you have, is that a goal for you, or this is just too much as it is?
I don't know if Western Loudoun will be a thing. There usually has to be so I chose this area, right, because of the drastic change between before and even when I've been alive. So potentially, I've been asked to do a couple of different Black communities. One I might do more. One that is more likely to happen sooner is Seven Corners, which was a Black community and had a some of the more prominent Black families that were more moneyed in lived in Seven Corners, and that kind of all got obliterated and turned into this traffic congestion nightmare. But nonetheless, lots of commerce happens there. Another one is the Pentagon. Around the Pentagon, there was a big Black community that was unfortunately kind of eroded, and they built this fortress there, right? That sort of continues this pattern of me doing federal stuff. They don't necessarily want me to talk too much about it, but another thing that I think is sort of a draw. So potentially, full disclosure, since I grew up around here, so this was very easy. This was much easier for me to do this research because I could go there very easily. Western Loudoun potentially, if I can make it there, a lot would happen. Yeah.
So who do you work for now?
I work for a satellite imagery company. So if you go to Google Maps and you hit satellite, you'll see the photos. So the company I work for takes pictures of those. Yes.
So to your comment about Gibran's work in having it done in Loudoun County. So not to this scale by any means, but the Center for Mason's Legacies with George Mason and the Black History Committee, Friends of the Thomas Balch Library, they're working in tandem on documenting African American communities in Loudoun. So you have St. Louis outside of Middleburg, there's Scatterville, which is outside of Luckett's. They have grant funding to do research for those things. And then also the Loudoun County Mapping and Planning has a like architectural survey of Loudoun, and then they have a GIS map of African American communities in Loudoun. So not to his scale, but there are resources out there for African American communities in Loudoun County.
The foundation has been laid.
The foundation has been laid, yes, or they're working on it, yeah.
Also, the last thanks to Mason Legacies and thanks to you guys, Willard is now kind of out there. Now, if you Google it, you will read about it, and a lot of that research I'm proud to have helped do. But that's not the only community by any means in the region, and even here, Conklin is under talked about. This was its own prominent Black community, and there's still semblances of it today. There's still worshipers there at that church. And this is all a work in progress, right? There's always more to do. It is impossible to really get everything, but I try, and westward is my focus now. I don't have too much about Arcola / Gum Springs, but I ought to. It's not like there was nothing there. So that westward will be a little bit more of my focus, as well as Black communities like Conklin and probably Cooktown, which is up north. So this needs to load. But
are you finding that the Black communities are helpful in giving you more information?
yes and no. There's been some I think there's a little bit of how do I say this? They're a little nervous to share some of the stuff because it's been weaponized. There's a lot of trauma, right? That goes back decades. But in the modern era, I think we'll see that going forward, this stuff will help. I actually know personally, I know a couple members of the Coates family who were very helpful and very eager to share their history. And so you can read about, I think, if you go to 1957, you can read about their homestead here, the Coates farm, and there's this house, and very, very prominent man, Leslie Coates, who did a sort of a sit-in at Fairfax City when he wasn't allowed to eat with the white folks during his jury duty. right? Yeah, I think these stories will be told more and more as time goes on.
I just, again, in the nineties, in Spartanburg, South Carolina is where I worked, and I wanted to do more with the African American community there, and it was starting to happen.
Yeah.
But just even my personal, I mean, it was still very contentious.
Yeah.
I just was, I was young, I was surprised by it, because I was very open to, oh, no, we want to include you, but the pushback that I got is kind of like.
There's some
no.
hesitance.
And, you know, now that I'm older, I understand better, and, you know, you get why it's happening, why it happens.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm trying to do what I can, basically.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So terrific project and presentation. Are there any contingencies to ensure it continues being available far into the future? We lose so many things to the internet, on the internet, as individuals and companies fall away.
Not much. I think I spend $30 or $40 for hosting every month. That's about it. So as long as I'm around, it'll be around. But yeah.
Maybe the library, we need to talk about backup plans. Yeah. Because as a archive, that is one of the things that is one of those questions about exclusively online content and what's the long-term preservation. So again, that is a new thing in the field for well, not too new, but newer questions, that it's not just paper records, but online digital content. How do you preserve that for long term? Luckily, all of the pieces that I used for all this, except for maybe the photographs that I had to pay for the rights for this, for example, a lot of it someone can reassemble them, right? So if I bring up these drawn plats, right, I will link you straight up to where I got that. And someone else, if they wanted to do this, they could do this, right? It's an open book. So this is a plat from 1908, and you can go ahead and take a look at it and all that. So it's not like it couldn't be redone, I'm sure. But yes, something to look into.
What's the heritage from the Willard to the Willard Hotel?
The Willard Hotel.
The grandson of
the Willard's namesake was the governor of Virginia, lieutenant governor of Virginia, and a prominent businessman who lived in Fairfax City. His dad was the founder of the Willard Hotel.
Oh, okay.
So big name family. Anything else? All right. Well, yeah, this is I guess a brief, not that brief, but a view into some of my work here. I have some tutorial. Man, I need to get rid of this. Floating. There are some tutorials here if you're ever lost. You know, there's a lot here, but I will show you there are little videos, and you can hit next and sort of figure out what to do. I've went ahead and done that. There's a lot to look at. I can't possibly go over all of it in one day, but yeah, I will always do my best to add to this and share it.
Yeah, one more comment,
yes.
Question. Could you please provide your contact information? I would love to introduce you to others in the hopes that you could repeat this presentation for students in Loudoun. Thank you for a spectacular presentation.
Thank you. When you first load up the page fresh, or if you hit the About button, there we go, and scroll down, you will see a contact email here, heritageDallasGeo@gmail.com, and I will respond to you very, very quickly. Here I also give my acknowledgements, which I should you definitely put out here. And among these folks are the Thomas Balch Library. Guys are very helpful here, especially Laura. Because none of this stuff could happen without historians, real historians, professional historians doing this before me. I'm just an amateur, and this is a side project. So, yep. So go ahead, and if you hit the About button, you can hit that contact to answer their question. All right.
I'm passing your name on to my friends that are teachers. So
great. Thank you so much.
History.
I was.